So recently I got asked a question that I didn't really know how to answer it too good. What is considered cheating, and as a Christian man, how do you stay loyal to your wife?
So we have to, as a Christian, we always have to define the way that we live based on the biblical principles that are outlined for us. We look at the teachings of Jesus, and he tells us that if we lust after another woman, we're as guilty as if we've committed adultery. So as a Christian man, we have to keep our eyes stayed on the partner that we've made a covenant with before God. Right? We tell God, I've made this covenant, this is going to be my partner, we're going to be unified in this covenant with you, and this is the person that I'm going to stay with. So as a man moving forward, we have to be willing to, or we have to be able to take our thoughts captive, to be able to give those things to the Lord, so we're not lusting after other women, we're not having those lustful desires and thoughts, because based on his terms, that's the line that has to be drawn. Right? A lot of men today in the secular world will say, oh, well, you can look, but you just can't touch. Right? Based on God's standards, they're committing adultery in their heart every time that they look and lust after a woman who is not their wife. And they're going to be held accountable for that. And as a Christian, God's given us the Holy Spirit to be able to overcome that lust and to eliminate that in our lives so it's not an issue. It can be a non-issue for a Christian man to have lust in your life. God can take that out of your heart. He can keep that. He can provide that as something that's not an issue in your relationship with your significant other. That goes for women as well. Right? But that's something that we have to submit to him in order for that to happen. And then we have to do what it takes to maintain that moving forward. We can't expect God to fix our broken heart and to be able to say, I'm going to patch that hole where you struggle with lust, and then go to places like the gym where you find yourself lusting after women, or visiting websites that are going to lead to problems, or looking at advertising, or going to places that are going to be a problem. You have to be willing to cut those out of your life, and God will empower the rest of that. You have to take the initiative, but there's a lot of Christians who aren't willing to do the things that are hard in order to follow after the standards that God set for us. So you can have relationships with people of the opposite sex as a married man or as a married woman, but you have to be disciplined enough to make sure that it doesn't become an emotional connection, it doesn't become a lustful connection, and if it does, you have to be willing to cut it off entirely in order to preserve the covenant that you've made with the Lord.
Describe emotional connection for slow people like me.
So you can have relationships with coworkers and people that you have those, people that you're around a lot, and you can start to develop an emotional connection with them that you don't have with your spouse because you're trusting in them, or you're telling them too much about yourself, or you're doing things in conversation with them that you're not willing to do with your spouse. Right? That union that you make in that covenant with your spouse is emotional, it's spiritual, and it's physical. So if you try to find emotional comfort in someone that's not your spouse, and you gain that connection and that trust with them, that's a problem, because the purpose of your relationship in that covenant is to fulfill that emotional connection. It's not always going to be perfect. You'll struggle, you'll have fights, you'll have issues where you'll have, some people just have a hard time sharing emotions or talking about struggles or things they're uncomfortable with. So there's a growth that needs to happen, but the anchor should be the relationship that you've made through that covenant with God, and he'll facilitate and enable that. But if you're busy, talking bad about your spouse behind their back to somebody else of the opposite sex, or someone that you're flirting with, or you're just being overly familiar with, that can lead to problems and can be divisive with that relationship that you have, that God has blessed, and not the one that you're trying to find quick emotional satisfaction in, if that makes sense.
Yeah.